start with a very specific image. A woman, 37 years old, sitting at a dining table, a real one, not a tiny studio apartment table but a proper family dining table. There is food in front of her. The house is quiet. The children are at her mother-in-law's for the weekend. Her husband is traveling for work, and she is eating dinner alone. Not sadly, not dramatically, not in the way we have been trained to imagine a woman alone, the way films show it, with rain on the window and swelling music. Just alone, quietly, with a book or nothing at all. And something about that evening, the silence, the stillness, the absence of anyone needing anything from her, feels like the first full breath she has taken in years. That image is where I want to begin today because I think it holds something we don't talk about enough, not the loneliness of Indian women. We talk about that, but the specific, unexpected relief that sometimes arrives when the roles temporarily fall away, and what that relief is actually telling us. The story Indian culture tells us about a woman's life has a very clear arc. Her 20s are for building, education, then career briefly, and then marriage. The narrative peaks somewhere around the wedding, that is culturally the high point, the moment the story was building toward. After that, the arc is maintenance, children, family, the careful daily management of everyone else's lives and needs, and the expectation, unspoken but pervasive, is that this is also the most fulfilling period, that the identity of wife, mother, daughter-in-law is the richest one she will inhabit. And then there is a second, quieter story that runs underneath this one, the story of a woman who did all of that, who married, who adjusted, who gave, who managed, and found herself somewhere in her mid-30s, looking up from the life she had built and asking a question she was never supposed to ask. Is this it? We don't have good language for that question in India. We have language for failure. She couldn't make her marriage work. She put her career before her family. We have language for success. She balanced it all. She was everything to everyone. But we don't have the language for the experience of a woman who did everything right and still feels quietly and persistently that she is living slightly outside her own life. What I've been watching across conversations, across the stories that women share when there is enough safety to be honest, is something that doesn't fill the cultural script at all. The women who are living the most fully, the most completely, the most authentically are not the women in their 20s navigating early freedom. They are the women in their late 30s and 40s, often after something has broken open, a marriage that ended, a child who grew old enough not to need her constantly, a point where the performance of a particular role became simply too exhausting to continue. And what I notice is that the women have one thing in common. Not education, not financial independence, though that helps, not a particularly progressive husband or family, though that also helps. The one thing they have in common is this: they stopped waiting for permission. Not loudly, not in dramatic declaration, just quietly, privately, in the small daily decisions. They stopped checking whether what they wanted was acceptable to the people around them before allowing themselves to want it. And that shift, which sounds so small when I describe it, turns out to be everything. Because the years before that shift, and this is what I want to examine closely, were not years of oppression in the obvious sense. Most of these women were not trapped by cruel husbands or deliberately controlling families. They were trapped by something much more subtle and therefore much more difficult to see and name. They were trapped by a habit of permission seeking that had been installed so early and so thoroughly that they no longer experienced it as external pressure. They experienced it as their own conscience. In India, we raise girls to be legible to the people around them. That is a core project of a girl's upbringing, whether or not anyone will name it that way. Legible means her behavior must be readable as appropriate, good, and unthreatening. Her desires must be fit within a range that the people around her can accommodate and approve. Her ambitions must be sized to the life that is available to her, and her sense of herself, her interior life, her own judgment about what she wants and needs must remain secondary to the consensus of the people who love her. This is not taught through cruelty, it is taught through love. Through her mother who says, "Don't say that, people will misunderstand you." Through her father who says, "Be careful, you don't want to bring the wrong kind of attention." Through relatives who mean well when they say, "A good girl doesn't insist." Through a culture that reserves its highest praise for women who give without asking, who adjust without complaining, who shrink gracefully. By the time a girl is 20, she has internalized this so completely that she does not experience it as a restriction. She experiences it as who she is. She thinks of herself as someone who naturally doesn't need much, naturally differs, naturally accommodates. She doesn't know what she was trained into it. And then she spends the next 15 years of her life, through her 20s and into her 30s, living inside that training, making decisions that are shaped by it, choosing relationships that confirm it, building a life that fits within its parameters. And then something happens. Sometimes it's a crisis, sometimes it's just time, sometimes it's a single conversation or a book or a moment of stillness at dining table where no one is asking anything of her, and she catches a glimpse of herself from the outside, and the question arrives, did I choose this, or did I follow the only map I was given? This pattern has a very particular shape inside marriages and long-term relationships. The woman who has been raised to be legible will spend the early years of her marriage doing something she has been doing her whole life, reading the room, sensing what is expected, calibrating herself to fit. She is not passive. She is often highly functional, highly capable, highly present. But underneath all of that functioning is a question she is always running quietly in the background. Is this okay? Am I too much? Too little? Am I getting this right? And what this creates over years is a very particular kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of overwork, though that is also present. The exhaustion of never fully being yourself, of always performing a version of yourself that has been checked against someone else's expectations before it is allowed to show up. The marriages I see struggling most are not the ones with obvious problems, the cruelty, the betrayal, the catastrophic incompatibility. The marriages I see struggling most are the ones where a woman has been quietly disappearing for years and neither she nor her husband has fully noticed, because she was trained to disappear gracefully and he has never taught to look. And then she turns 35 or 38 or 40 and something shifts and she starts slowly and uncertainly to take up more space, to want more openly, to have opinions she doesn't immediately soften before sharing. And that shift, which is simply her becoming more fully herself, often registers in the relationship as a problem, as her becoming difficult, as something to be managed, when actually it is the healthiest thing that has happened in that relationship in years. I want to name something carefully here because it matters. The freedom that arrives after 35, when it arrives, is not freedom from responsibility. It is not freedom from love or family or commitment. Those don't disappear, and the women I am describing don't want them to. It is something more specific than that. It is freedom from the habit of self-erasure, freedom from the reflex of checking whether your own desire is acceptable before you allow yourself to feel it, freedom from the particular exhaustion of living inside a version of yourself that was designed for someone else's comfort. And this freedom, when it arrives, has a quality that is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it yet. It is not triumph, it is not relief exactly, though there is relief in it. It is more like coming into focus, like seeing yourself clearly for the first time, like arriving somewhere you should have been allowed to be all along. The women who experience this describe it in very similar ways. A quietness, a sense of finally taking up the space that was always theirs, an ability to be in a room without managing how they are being perceived every moment. And here is what I want to say to the women who are not there yet, who are still in the years of adjusting, still running the background question, still living inside a life that fits everyone except themselves. The permission you are waiting for is not coming from outside. It was never going to come from outside. The structure that required you to wait for it is the same structure that benefited from you waiting. You do not need to rouse yourself. You do not need to have a confrontation or a crisis or a dramatic reorientation. You just need to begin quietly in the small decisions to stop asking. There is a specific cruelty in the way Indian culture talks about women's time. At 25, she is told she is running out of it. At 30, she should have settled. At 35, her story is already being spoken about in the past tense, as though she peaked somewhere before she had a chance to fully arrive. I want to offer a different reading of that timeline. The years before 35, for many Indian women, are years of learning a role, of discovering what is expected and finding out whether she can inhabit it, of testing the boundaries of who she is allowed to be inside the life available to her. The years after 35, when something opens up, those were often the first years of her actual life. Not the life that was handed to her, not the life she performed, the life that is genuinely hers. This is not a woman who missed her window. This is a woman who has finally stopped waiting for a permission she was never given, she was never going to be given, and that, when I see it happen, is one of the most quietly powerful things I know. What enables that shift? The conversations, the relationships, the structures of family that either make it possible or make it harder is something I've written about in Dear Sister, Dear Brother, Letters of Freedom. It is a book about what happens inside Indian families, between siblings, between generations, between the people who shaped us and the people who we are becoming, and specifically about what changes when the people around a woman begin to see her. Not as a role, not as a person, because the permission she has been waiting for, sometimes it arrives when one person close to her simply begins to ask the right questions, and sometimes that person is a sibling, a brother who was in the same house but never taught to look, a sister who was too busy managing her own legibility to notice. These details are in the show notes.